and welcome to another episode of A Language I Love Is, the podcast that's all about languages, linguistics, and love. I'm your host, Danny, and today you and I are journeying into the Alps, specifically to the Swiss canton of Graubünden. There, we will join Emma Gledhill, who's passionate about Switzerland's fourth and arguably least well-known language. This episode is all about Romansh.
Meu nome é Daniel Telli, ja sam cresciuto a Trin, qua in Vitsch, al confine linguistic, curto von Flem. A casa vai in Cianciao, Romansh a Trin, in scuola vai più Sur Silvan. Ma dopo per quel video che ho, di scuola è Sur Silvan, forse che ho mittel und tiki in Romansh a Trin, ja sai. Ja sam cresciuto in una famiglia de purs, vai faccio le scuole a Trin. Sempre studiato giudizio, nordistica ed inglese. Avevo iniziato circa 1997 a lavorare in la Romansh, come linguist, come coloratura linguistica.
Right, so today I have the pleasure to be joined all the way from Switzerland by Emma Gledhill. Now, Emma is a practicing translator. She's been working in translation for over 30 years now, doing French, German, Dutch, a little bit of Italian. And as well as her work in translation, she is a chartered linguist, a fellow of both the Chartered Institute of Linguists and of the Institute of Translation and Interpreting. With the Chartered Institute of Linguists, she is a council member and a chair for the membership committee. And after many years working as a freelancer, she now works with Avaloq, which is a Swiss-based company that makes banking software, and she works as a language services specialist with them. And I'm delighted that she's proposed that we talk about one language which I know of, but don't know that much about, so I'm learning just as much as you are today, dear listener. So first things first, Emma, how are you? How's life in Switzerland at the moment?
I'm very well, thank you, and life in Switzerland is peachy.
Peachy, fantastic. And you are in the south east of Switzerland, is that right?
That's right, I'm up in the Swiss Alps, I'm up a mountain.
I'm a huge fan of the Alps, those majestic peaks, so I won't pretend to hide my envy. Now, your geographical location is of relevance to the language that we're going to be talking about today. So, really, at this juncture, Emma, could you introduce the language that you love and want to discuss with us today?
Yes, indeed. The language that I love and we're going to be talking about today is Romansh, or Romansh, and it is Switzerland's fourth language.
And I dare say the least well-known of Switzerland's official languages. I think people might think of Switzerland as a language where they speak German, French, also Italian, but Romansh, well, Romansh is also there and deserves its moment in the spotlight. So I think a nice place to begin with the story of Romansh is to dig into the name of this language. It's Romansh, but it is a Romance language. Could you unpack for the listeners, what does that mean to be a Romance language, and what is its family tree like in terms of its cousins and sister languages?
Yes, of course. I mean, a Romance language, that means it's part of the, shall we say, Indo-European roots. The Romance language family covers languages such as French, Italian, Spanish, Portuguese, and Romanian, and Romansh is not to be confused with Romanian, completely different languages. It's a small language. It's spoken only in the Graubünden canton of southeastern Switzerland. Graubünden is the only canton in Switzerland that is trilingual, speaking German, Italian, and Romansh. And its suppositions are that the name actually derived from the Roman Empire region of Rhaetia, hence Rätoromansch. And that extended a lot further geographically than it does today. It's part of the Gallo-Romance branch of Romance languages, so that which includes French, Occitan, Lombard, those sort of languages. And arguably the closest relatives to Romansh are the Ladin language of the Italian Dolomites and Friulian from northern Italy. It's a small language. It's only spoken by about half to 0.75% of the Swiss population, which comes to about 60,000 people.
Right, so we've situated Romansh within its family tree. Of course, you mentioned the wider Indo-European context and the slightly narrower context of being a descendant of Latin. I'm just curious in terms of intelligibility. Let's say we teleported someone from Rome and someone else from, say, Paris, so that is an Italian speaker and a French speaker. How much would they understand if they had to commune with Romansh speakers?
If you're talking modern day, I think a modern day French speaker would not understand it unless they've studied it a bit, because it is a separate language. Italian speakers, native Italian speakers, I think get on with it a little bit better. I have friends from Italy who come up and they can make out what's going on, but it is a separate language, or should I say almost languages.
Yes, of course, and we'll get into that as well. The dialectal situation. Even though it is a small language, there's a tremendous amount of diversity within the umbrella term of Romansh. I'm just curious then, could you take us forward in time from those Latin origins? When do we start to see Romansh in the historical record, for example? Being not a very big language, I imagine it takes some time to emerge out from under the shadow of Latin, for example, in the written sources. When do we start to see people writing in Romansh and talking about Romansh and thinking of it as a separate language?
To be honest, I can't tell you entirely. It's very much shaped by the geography and the nature of the area. It's found in very mountainous areas. It's typically farming communities. So literacy, I imagine, is not as widespread in early years as in maybe other larger areas, but it was widely spoken. And I don't know how much your listeners know about Switzerland, but it's a confederation and came together very gradually over the course of a very long time, centuries. Romansh was the language of certainly my area of Graubünden between Chur and the Oberalp Pass. And that was the area where there was an organisation called the Grey League, who came together to defend against the various influences of the French and the Austrians. And another league formed between Chur and the Engadine. And then there was another league came together north of Chur into what's now St. Gallen and the Toggenburg area. And they were basically sort of mutual defence leagues. And it wasn't until the late 18th century, in fact, 1803 was when Graubünden finally became a canton of Switzerland. So actually part of the larger country. So Romansh was being spoken all through those centuries, but it was being pushed back all the time. I think one key event was actually in about 1465. At the time, Chur, which is the oldest settlement in Switzerland and also the capital of Graubünden, was Romansh speaking. And then it suffered a catastrophic fire. And it turned out that the artisans who came to rebuild the city actually came down from German-speaking regions, and they then settled in Chur. So Chur, through that event and that sequence of events, became German-speaking. So you can imagine if you've got the largest city and the most important town in the whole region, over the course of, let's say, a generation, suddenly changes from one language to another. And of course, think about that date. It's 1465. It's the back end of the 15th century. And it's about the time the printing press was coming in. And that change, the supposition is that change actually happened just before the printing press. Imagine if the printing press had come along before that. And over time, the Romansh language got pushed back further and further, and the creeping influence of German and Swiss German. And also, don't forget, Zurich was a fairly important city in the Reformation, and a lot of Romansh-speaking areas tend to be quite Catholic.
Right, okay, so it does seem like a story of the retreat of Romansh, like it has over time, at least in terms of geography, the geography of Switzerland, it has shrunk over time. Is that something that you can sense of? Are there areas that used to be Romance speaking, but perhaps in recent decades or centuries have switched?
Yes, indeed. A story of retreat is sadly actually describes it quite well, and the growing influence of German speaking areas and the German language as a consequence. There are maps you can find on the internet that show the Romansh speaking areas in, say, 1860 compared with 2000. And it's quite a stark contrast. All the bits of Romansh are so bound by their valleys. And I think this is probably starting to head into the dialects or idioms. And some have survived better than others.
But I'm curious though. So we have this language which is not on an equal footing with the other languages of Switzerland. How then does it achieve this, impressive status of one of the 4 official languages? I mean, Switzerland is tremendously linguistically diverse. So why give that status to Romansh and not to, I don't know, some dialect of Swiss German, for example? How does Romansh achieve that?
Well, Romansh was actually in quite a great deal of trouble at the beginning of the 20th century. It's not only a story of retreat, but it's a story of survival as well. It was really on the back foot at the beginning of the 20th century. Then the Swiss government proposed that it should be made an official language, a national language, alongside German, French, and Italian. And Switzerland being Switzerland, it eventually went to referendum, and it's 1938, I believe. And the official status, the granting the official status, was actually voted on by the population and got 90% approval. So that in 1938, so as recent as that, Romansh became an official language of Switzerland, which has, I wouldn't say it stopped its decline completely, but it's at least put it on an official footing with support.
That will make a huge difference to the fate of any language, to have that recognition and status. Yes, I can understand that completely. Well, you mentioned the dialects there. Let's dig into those, because as someone who works with Romance languages, Romansh often, makes an appearance in the books that I read and, the academic articles and the like, but it's so often mentioned with the specific dialects. It's often said like, this is the Romansh word, but in brackets there'll be an S or something just to say this is not the universal word for this thing within Romansh. There always needs to be this caveat as to who actually uses a particular word within Romansh. So I get the impression that there is tremendous diversity within the Romansh language. As much as you can you unpack that diversity for us? Is it truly, disunited now, the Romansh-speaking area?
Well, it's interesting. As I said earlier, there's only about 60,000-ish speakers of Romansh, or at least who say it's the language they're most comfortable in. I suppose if you add it up to everyone who has any sort of capability, I believe the figure heads towards 100,000. But that's not a lot of people out of a country of 8+ million. And within that, you've got 5 what they call idioms, more than dialects, the largest of which is Stoorsilvan, which is the dialect spoken along the Rhine Valley between Chur and the Oberalp Pass and Disentis, the big monastery at Disentis, or Muштej in Romansh, because some of the names are very different. And it focuses on the area around Ilanz in German, or Lyon in Romansh. That accounts for probably 55% of speakers. And it's the healthiest, or one of the healthiest of the idioms. Another big region is down in the Engadine, so between St. Moritz and Schwol, places like that. So in the very, very southeast of Switzerland. And they have 2 idioms. One is called Pute, and the other is Velada. And then there are 2 slightly smaller idioms, Sumiran, which is spoken in the Albula area, and Sutsilvan, which is spoken between Thusis and a bit further to the east there. And you can actually tell a bit more about the geography just from the names of these idioms. Stursilvan, Romance language specialists listening to this might recognize the word silva, selva, forest. And you've got the Sur-Sylvan area above the forest and the Sut-Sylvan area below the forest. Within dialects, within idioms, there are subdialects. So in Sur-Sylvan, there are three major dialects. Cadi, which is spoken to the west of Elance, towards Disentis, Mushte. Lumnatia, which is spoken in the Val Lumnatia, around Lumnatia village. And Foppa, which is spoken to the east of Elance, up the hill towards Falera and Largs. And even within those subdialects, you get sub-subdialects and differences in actual verb forms almost. So, for instance, I can give you some examples. This is within Sur-Sylvan, which is the idiom spoken in my area and the one I know about properly. So, for instance, the verb to be, essa, you say I am. In some areas, it's yo sun. In other areas, it might be yo sundul. So Foppa tends to put an el on the end. So venye, to come, yovain or yovanial. And then just to get even more extreme, the verb to pull, tre, can be yo try, yo trial, or even yo tilo. You can probably hear there are quite a few differences. And that's a reflection of the isolation of some of the valleys. With so many different idioms, and it has to be said at this stage that, let's say, Sur-Sylvan and the Engadine idioms are not necessarily mutually intelligible. So if you have somebody from the Engadine meeting somebody from Surselva, they may end up reverting to German as a lingua franca. And about 40 or so years ago, no more than that, 50 years ago, it was felt that really there should be a form of Romansh that was mutually intelligible and incorporated elements of each of the idioms. And so a unifying form called Romansh Grisons, so Romansh of Graubünden, was created. This was in 1982. And that is what is the official form of Romansh for government business, government documents, the canton website. It's used for the television station. It's used in the daily newspaper. And there was an attempt to push it through into schooling. But to be honest, it didn't last very long because everyone's very fond of their own idioms. It's such a marker of their identity that even the areas that did adopt Romansh Grisons in the schools subsequently voted to revert to their own idioms. It still exists, but nobody speaks it. It's written, it's read, but it's maybe read out loud on news bulletins, but nobody actually speaks it.
What about outsiders? What about people coming into this linguistic community, or communities, I should say? Say, for example, if I started learning Romansh, would I learn that, this sort of artificial standard language? What would I find in a textbook?
Well, that's very interesting. Firstly, you would probably have to know German because most of the learning materials are in German. So that is a barrier to its spread. You would probably learn the idiom of wherever you were visiting or wherever you were living. So there is an organisation called the Lehr Romanche. It's a non-profit supported by the government, and it is set up to promote and support the Romansh language. But because of the variety involved in the language, their remit is actually to support all of them. So it would be lovely if there were some English teaching materials, but unfortunately they simply don't have the budget because it's not like they would have to just create a set of teaching materials. They would have to create a set for all 5 idioms and Romansh Grisons. So suddenly 6 times the work involved, 6 times the budget involved. And their budget, sadly, only reaches to cover their official remit at national and canton level.
Now, within this hypothesis, this rather charming daydream, which I'm enjoying, in which I have to learn Romansh, one obstacle that I wouldn't have would be to learn a different script. Unsurprisingly, based on its geography and its history, this is a language which uses the Latin alphabet. But nonetheless, there are one or two, or I'm thinking of one particular, sort of orthographic quirk, if I can put it like that, something that's really quite noticeable when you find some Romansh written down. What is that? Could you introduce it? What is that quirk and what sound does it stand for?
Yes, indeed. I know exactly the one you're thinking of, the idiosyncrasy. As you say, it's in Latin script. Anyone who speaks Western European language would be able to read it once they get the hang of what the orthography reflects in terms of the actual sounds. And the one you're thinking of is, certainly to English speakers, an extremely strange combination of letters, and that is TG. And it's actually pronounced ch, as in church. If you were to just transliterate the beginning and the end of the word church with TG instead of CH, I can see you're imagining it right now and thinking how odd it will look, but the sound is the same. That is actually one that is quite odd. It's really difficult to learn. You just have to learn which words are TG and which are TSCH because the sound is the same. If I gave you the word for a dog and the word for 100, you have a chown and chien. So the sounds are the same, but a chown, a dog, is with TG, and chien for 100 is TSCH at the beginning. Not a completely alien combination of letters, especially for any Germanists. But TG just looks odd.
It really does. It really does, I have to say. And it's so noticeable that I think, yeah, this is the clearest indication that you're looking at some Romansh. So if people are off on their Swiss holidays anytime soon, especially if you're heading to Graubünden, keep an eye out for this, in signs or in menus or whatever piece of linguistic content you are enjoying. That's how I choose to spend my holidays. I don't know about you, but yeah. Wonderful stuff. Now, a final question from me. Now, we should be clear. This is a language which, at least in the present day, does not have any monolingual speakers. There will be people who speak another language of Switzerland, most likely German or Swiss German. With that in mind, we've got a situation of intense contact between languages in Switzerland, even though, of course, there are these ginormous mountains in the way which are going to impede easy communication and easy transportation around Switzerland. Nonetheless, these languages have been rubbing up against each other for some time. Is that reflected in Romansh? Are there influences from outside of the language, from, say, German, for example?
Yes, you can certainly see the relationship between Romansh with French and with Italian and with German. Somewhat jokingly, I like to sort of suggest that it's sort of based on French grammar and Italian vocabulary and German mindset. There are a lot of similarities. Probably the closest similarities are between Romansh and Italian. And there are definitely cognate words, a lot of cognate words. There are differences. I made the mistake of learning Italian and Romansh at the same time. And yes, it can cause a lot of confusion. There are inevitably false friends. I mean, even just down to the indefinite article is in and ina in Romansh and un and una in Italian. So you can see the relationship and you can guarantee that whichever language you're trying to speak, it comes out wrong. If you're learning Romansh and you know French, the grammar will definitely seem reasonably familiar to you. But there's also an element, not completely, but an element of the German idea of verb second, particularly when you're talking about subordinate clauses or sentences made up of more than one clause. So to give you an example, if I would say in English, I want to buy a car, so I'm going to go to the garage. In French and Italian, it's probably going to be a similar sort of syntax. But in Romansh, taking from the German, it has the German aspect where you will almost certainly hear it more, I want to buy a car, go I therefore to the garage.
So perhaps not in vocabulary, but at the structural level, we're finding some German influences then, which makes sense. As I said, with that long spiel, all these languages, there's a tremendous linguistic diversity of Switzerland between the mountains.
I mean, you're right, it's structurally, yes. But of course, there is always the influence of vocabulary because of the ubiquity of German in Switzerland and along the borders of the Romansh-speaking areas. The Italian borders are by far the smaller ones. In any conversation in Romansh, you'll often hear the odd schon or aber thrown in. So the particles, you'll hear lots of German words. It is an area of alpine farmers originally, and to a large extent still. So, for instance, there's no word for ferry because there's no waterways to cross by ferry. But as modern day impinges, neologisms will often come from other languages and become adopted as loanwords.
After that superb language biography, really superb, I find myself just sat here daydreaming about the Swiss Alps and, the life of the people in between the mountains and the linguistic life, admittedly, too. Really, this is our chance to get to know you, Emma, now, because I think people listening will have questions as to how you came to love Romansh. Well, what's your story that takes you from point A to point B? So, as much as you would like to share, tell us that tale. How did you find yourself now, sat within Graubünden in Switzerland?
Well, I guess as with most of life, it's a combination of choice and a combination of chance. My background is obviously in languages. I did a degree in German and music, followed by a master's in translation. I lived in the UK apart from a year abroad until the year 2000, and then had the opportunity to move to Switzerland. Moved to the Zurich area, like so many people from outside Switzerland do. That's where the work is. But I've had connections to this area since about 2003. It'll be no surprise that with so many mountains, there's quite a few ski resorts, and quite enjoyed sliding down hills on planks of, well, not wood these days, but somehow the whole area around here just spoke to me, and bought a property a few years later and was coming down on a regular basis to ski. And the Lehre Romanche runs a 2-week summer course every year, initially for beginners, but they do all sorts of levels all the way up to C2, practically native speaker level. And I'd always wanted to take it and somehow never did. And then the stars aligned, had the opportunity to move down here permanently in 2016. And I promised myself that I would finally learn Romansh. I'm a linguist, I'm a translator. I sort of collect languages, nowhere near as much as some people do, but it's still a fascination. I thought, well, I'm living here. It's not your everyday language to learn. I'm living in a village that is officially Romansh speaking. I can't not learn it. How can I be a linguist and then not learn my local language? So I gave myself 2 years of the classes, and 7 years on, I'm still taking classes. It just become a fascination. We actually live right on the language border between German and Romansh. For instance, our local school operates in Romansh. It's its primary language. The kids do have their schooling in nothing but Romansh until about 3rd grade, and only then is German introduced. And in the next village along, which happens to be the other side of a river gorge, a tributary of the Rhine, and they are now a German-speaking area, and the schools run in German, and the kids get about 45 minutes of Romansh a week. So it's very much a living language around here. Even our local Lidl and Aldi, all the signs above the aisles are in Romansh. Everything is very localized. It is very much a living language. It may be an endangered language, but it's the most lively endangered language. And so just the fascination of that, the idea of helping to keep it alive by learning it and by talking about it and by promoting it where I can and boring everyone silly. It just, I don't work from it, but I make every effort to use it in everyday life, certainly local tradespeople or in the shops and the council offices, and integrate it into part of everyday life.
Wonderful. Well, that makes total sense to me. I mean, after all, if you learn the language, that means you're going to get more out of life. That means you can get stuck into the local community. Fantastic. I have to ask, what's the reaction of native speakers to you speaking and learning this language? Are they happy? Are they delighted? Or is it a bit, oh, that's strange?
They must be delighted because they insist on rattling off full speed. I'm nearly there, but I'm not quite keeping up all the time. So it's, I must be doing okay if they think I'll understand them at full speed, at full dialect. But yeah, it really does make a difference. It makes a huge difference to integration. I'll see people around the village who've maybe done some work on our place. And it's not just, some holiday maker or holiday homeowner, but actually the sort of get waved at like mad. We're a small village, 2,000 people, which is massively bigger than I think some of the older families would like. They're concerned about how quick, fast, and how much it's growing. But still, by any measure, 2,000 people isn't a huge volume of people. And like many places in Switzerland generally, and certainly in mountain valleys, there's a lot of families that have been here, well, since the Middle Ages almost, but certainly for centuries. You hear the same names everywhere.
I think it's clear from what you told us in that last section that you have this great commitment and interest in the Romansh language. Within your story and your relationship with this language, what is one thing that stands out for you as something that you really love about Romansh?
Well, there's so many things that I do love about Romansh, but I'm going to be fairly good and keep to your one. Let's have a think about a linguistic aspect that I've not encountered before in other languages that I know. And that's the concept of collective plurals. You've had that mentioned on the pod before now, but it was completely new to me. The concept is that things can be countable or uncountable nouns. And there are items that can be both. Let's take an example. Let's take an easy example. A finger is il det, masculine. And two fingers are dus dets, also masculine. But if you're talking about all your fingers and thumbs, you have la detta, feminine. It's a collective plural. It's a singular noun, la detta, but it's a collective plural. And that comes up quite often in Romansh. It's quite often to do with materials. So you can talk about with wood, you have len is a single piece of wood, less often dus lens, although theoretically it exists. But if you're talking about wood generically, it would be la lena. And there's even a lena bar, and it's a bar made of wood. And the one that always has English speakers smiling is the word for rock, which is il crap. You have dus craps, but la crappa. So something made of rock is made of crappa. Actually, I'm going to break your rule, I'm afraid. I'm not going to stick to one. I'm really sorry. But one of the things I love about Romansh, it's got some fantastic words, and I'm going to give you 3 or 4 if I may. One is actually the etymology as well. You've got the months of June and July. If you think about Italian, the Junio, Luglio, Juin, Juillet, June, July, you can see the cognates with English. And even in German, you've got Juni, Juli, again, cognates. But in Romansh, June is cercladur, which is the etymology. It comes from the verb cerclar, which is to weed, as in do the weeding. And July is fenadur, from the verb fenar, which is bringing in the haymaking. So the life that people used to lead here is reflected directly in the language. You've got tremble tiara, which is an earthquake, literally trembling land. And for some reason that tickles me pink. And then probably my very favourite word is the word for bat, as in the flying mammal. It's just bat in English, 3 letters. And in Romansh, it's mietsmur e mietsuchi, which is literally half mouse and half bird. And I just love that.
Me too. Generally, me too. That is a glorious word. Yeah, I mean, it must mean that Batman is his translated name in Romansh must be pretty long. It doesn't. Yeah.
Ilum mietsmure mietsuchi. No, I suspect it's probably just Batman as a name.
Oh, how dull. After those delightful words in Romansh, which I really, really enjoyed, yes, my view of bats is completely changed. I have to pose to you the third and final personal question, which is, of course, what is something that you want the good people listening to know about Romansh? What is your parting point for us to take away and to remember next time we're in the Alps?
I think it's that it is an endangered language, but so alive. It's full of contradictions like that. Romansh is still surviving because there is such a strong link between the language and the identity of the people. There is a really strong bond. It's a tiny number of people who speak it, but it sort of punches above its weight. So, for instance, probably the second most familiar children's book in the German-speaking world, Shellen Orsley, was originally written in Romansh, and the illustrations were by a Romansh illustrator who actually won the first Hans Christian Andersen Prize for Illustrations of Children's Literature, Alois Karadzic. You've got so many idioms and dialects, it's so fragmented, and yet it's still mostly standing despite the many threats to its existence. That's very strongly illustrated by the approach taken in schools. The areas where it's the language of instruction in schools, it's pretty strong. Areas where it isn't, the dialects are really on their uppers and at threat of extinction. And it's just the chance to learn an endangered language and feel that somehow, in my own little way, I'm still contributing to keeping it alive.
Yes, that makes so much sense to me. Language death is not this... It's not a process where it just, slowly loses vitality as some essential quality. It's just, it shrinks, but within those contexts when it is spoken, it is very much alive. I can see that entirely. Well, this has been delightful. I've enjoyed this so much. I love learning about the complex linguistic landscape of the Alps, as well as, of course, the geographical complexity. This has been super. Emma, thank you so much for suggesting this language and being such a brilliant guest today. And, till the next time, perhaps, with some other language that you know and love.
Thank you, Danny. It's you told me I could say this was the opportunity to say I've really hated it. It's been an awful experience, but that would be a lie. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. Thank you very much for having me.
As always, it's time now for my final fun fact. And for this episode, it seems appropriate to dig into an English word with two very different meanings. The word romance. How did we end up using romance to mean love, passion, relationships, etc., but also as a term for languages that descend from Latin, such as Romansh? The two uses are wildly at odds for most English speakers, though maybe not for some linguists. To account for the divergence, we need to travel back in time to early medieval France. The word romance, from the Latin adjective Romanicus, relating to the Romans, was used to refer to the everyday language of people in what's now France, a language that they had come to realise was very different from the classical Latin that they knew from literary texts. The same linguistic self-identification would happen among Romansh speakers too, hence their name for the language. In this distinction between Latin and the newer Romance way of speaking in France, we have the origins of the linguistic term. In early modern English, we see the expansion of that term beyond French to its wider family. The romantic meaning of romance, meanwhile, comes from poems and stories written in the vernacular language. These were tales of chivalry and great adventure, such as the works of Chrétien de Troyes, to whom we owe so many of our stories of King Arthur and his knights. The term romance shifted from the language of the genre to the genre itself, and consequently the French word for a novel is roman, as well as roman in German and roman in Czech. Then, later, in 19th century English, we see another shift in meaning, this time changing from fiction to personal adventures and love stories in real life. So, that's everything for another episode of A Language I Love Is. If you've enjoyed this episode, and if you haven't already done so, please do subscribe and give the show a rating wherever you get your podcasts. Also, please do recommend the show to all your friends and family, as it's really by word-of-mouth recommendations that this show is finding its audience. My thanks must go to my guest today, Emma, and also to you, dear listener, for listening. Keep well, and keep loving language.